The views and opinions expressed on the following program are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily represent those of any organization, including One Generation Away.
The freedom of a people to choose its leaders is the root of liberty.
Keep alive this experiment in liberty.
Liberty, in case you've forgotten, is the soul's right to breathe.
Government should be very minimal in protecting liberty.
Peace cannot be purchased at the cost of liberty.
The sturdy ground of liberty.
Liberty once lost is lost forever.
Fight for their liberty and for our security.
Guarantees individual liberty.
This great republic, born alone in liberty.
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 Liberty. Liberty.
Just how much do you want liberty?
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner,
a production of LibertyNation.com.
cutting through the double talk, taking on the topics, going after what the politicians really mean, and making it all clear. For your freedom and your liberty. Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Just over 2 weeks until America votes, and the Democrats are stunned by the self-immolation of a prominent fake Indian senator. We'll talk over the state of play in the impending midterm elections and the sad tale of Pocahontas. Welcome back into Liberty Nation Radio, a production of LibertyNation.com, and heard from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. Will the blue wave hit land, or will it crash out at sea? Is it cresting or waning? And what about the fallout from Senator Elizabeth Warren's ill-fated attempt to prove she really does have Native American blood? All of that coming up, plus LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor Scott Cosenza on the first major world economy to legalize recreational marijuana, and the latest wave of judicial nominees from President Trump, including one which you'll find quite surprising. So it's been quite a series of self-inflicted October surprises for Democrats hoping to take control of the House and possibly even the Senate. They tried to destroy Judge Brett Kavanaugh, but failed. Porn star Stormy Daniels sued President Trump, and she failed, and winds up having to pay Trump's legal fees. This week, a major contender for the 2020 Democrat presidential nomination, Elizabeth Warren, shoots herself in the foot with a bow and arrow. The Democrat candidate for governor of Illinois is sued by his own campaign staff for his insufficient commitment to racial diversity. The Democrat candidate for governor of Georgia says blue wave voters will consist of both the documented and undocumented. Are the Democrats blowing what seemed to be a sure thing just a few weeks ago? A midterm tie that would lift all their votes and grant them control of the U.S. House of Representatives and possibly even the Senate? If the Democrats only needed to pick up, say, a dozen seats to take over the House, they might still be in good position. But they need a net gain of 23 seats, a more daunting task to be sure, but still very achievable for the party out of control of the White House in midterms. Let's take a look back. In 1994, when Bill Clinton was president, Republicans picked up 54 seats in the House and 8 in the Senate in a true wave election that came to be known as the Newt Gingrich Revolution. But that was based around a specific set of reforms proposed by the GOP that came to be known as the Contract with America. We see no evidence that Democrats have assembled any sort of coherent platform outside of resistance to Trump this year. Fast forward to the 2010 midterms when Republicans picked up an astounding 63 seats in the House and 6 in the Senate, effectively neutering President Obama's legislative agenda for the remaining 6 years of his presidency. That one was based less on a Republican agenda than widespread opposition to Obamacare. Now, facts are facts. The party of the incumbent president has lost ground during midterm elections 90% of the time over the last century, with an average loss of 30 seats in the House and 4 in the Senate. In only 2 midterms in the last century has the president's party actually gained seats in both houses. So Republicans will be fighting history. But it's certainly possible they might lose, say, a half dozen or a dozen seats or even 20 and still control the House, thus avoiding impeachment hearings and all manner of investigations certain to be ginned up by committees headed by majority Democrats. Over in the Senate, where Democrats are forced to defend 2/3 of the seats up for election this year, Republican prospects are brighter. They should be able to at least hold and perhaps add to their razor-thin 51-49 majority. But another overarching issue going back to the founding of the Republic is that the American people like divided government. Or put another way, the voters are very wary of one party controlling the presidency, the Senate, and the House, no matter which party it is. So while Donald Trump shattered many a political tradition and changed the way politics is done a couple of years ago, he and the Republicans are fighting a very powerful undertow of resistance, not just to him, but to the very notion of one-party dominance. But in reviewing the bidding for this particular midterm election, one side can boast an impressive array of achievements and mold breaking. The other pledges to resist at all costs. We're in the most polarized political environment in decades. The 2018 Democrats are positioned as a party openly proclaiming their intention to resist all things Trump and little else. They've offered no coherent platform other than defying Trump at every turn. Now, Democrats can talk all they want about the impeachment of Trump or Brett Kavanaugh if they gain control of the House, but they know full well that the chances of fulfilling their real ambition of removing either of them are almost zero. The 2/3 vote in the Senate required to remove either one will never happen, absent dramatic intervening events. Now, Democrats have hardly been alone in obstructing a president of the opposing party. Republicans similarly tried to block almost every move by President Obama. Senator Mitch McConnell pledged to make Obama a one-term president. But there's a crucial distinction here. GOP opposition that year was based strictly on policy rather than Obama's widely appealing persona. This time, it's deeply personal. The left's searing hatred for Trump is, in the words of Hillary Clinton, irredeemable. They will never, ever believe that the American people could possibly elect this vulgarian unless things were not on the level. Hence, it must have been Russia or the FBI or whatever. Call it irrational. But the left believes it down to the marrow of their bones. Expect the president and his GOP allies to, in turn, spend ample time in the run-up to Election Day pounding home the specter of congressional power turned over to the terrifying trio of Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, and, of course, Maxine Mad Max Waters. Now, compare the Democrats' immovable object of hatred for Trump to the irresistible force of the president's documented results. In less than 21 months, he has pushed through massive deregulation and a game-changing tax reform bill, providing a shot of adrenaline to an economy that has outpaced even the most optimistic expectations, more than 4% growth in the latest quarter. The stock market is up 40% since Trump's election. 4 million new jobs have been created, including more than 400,000 in manufacturing sectors written off as hopeless. Unemployment has reached historically low levels. In fact, at 3.7%, we're near what economists consider full employment. And most notably, jobless rates have hit new lows among the Democrats' most important constituencies, blacks, Hispanics, and women. Trump has used the full leverage of American economic and military strength to cut superior international deals, such as the latest with Canada and Mexico, and to pull out of Others, foremost among them, the nuclear deal with Iran and the Paris Climate Accord. He's dramatically changed the course of relations with a nation many consider to be the greatest threat to America, North Korea. And the long-negotiated release of American pastor Andrew Brunson by Turkey this last week now brings the number of Americans liberated from foreign captivity since Trump took office up to 18. Trump has broken the mold of how business is to be done. He served notice that unlike previous presidents, he's not owned by anyone and will not be bound by tradition. Consider Trump's latest venture into the land of this is not how you're supposed to do it. He publicly criticized the Federal Reserve for the 8 rate hikes it has engineered since he took office, a move many a president would love to have made but never did. Similarly, he ignored the near-unanimous advice of his political consultants and called out the holes in Christine Blasey Ford's story, changing the course of that judicial nomination of Brett Kavanaugh. Trump finally did what his predecessors had promised for years to do and moved the U.S. Embassy in Israel to Jerusalem. Consider also that the GOP is now united as never before under Trump after arguably the most underrated element of Trump's nomination of Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court, and that would be uniting traditional conservatives with the Trump base. I mean, even President George W. Bush, hardly a fan of Trump, joined in the chorus of praise for Kavanaugh, and all the old-line Republicans, especially Lindsey Graham, were forceful advocates for then Judge, now Justice Kavanaugh. Unsurprisingly, Donald Trump is the least nuanced president in American history. He rarely lets a thought go unexpressed, nor a promise go unfulfilled. This is what his supporters love and his detractors hate. So ignore the circus sideshows and the biased media and look at the results, the true bottom line. Fact is, if this election is a referendum on Trump's results, the GOP stands a chance of losing a minimal number of seats or even gaining in the House and could pick up anywhere from 3 to 5 seats in the Senate. If, on the other hand, it becomes a referendum on Trump's personality, the resistance is likely to ride some sort of blue wave. Any way you cut it, while he's not on the ballot in any of the 468 House and Senate races across the land, the 2018 midterm elections will undeniably be a referendum on Donald J. Trump. Bring it on. Quick break, and then we're back with our signature segment, Say What?
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner. This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Say what? Say what? Say what? One more time.
Say What, the portion of Liberty Nation Radio where we roll out some of the most wacky, astonishing, and damnable things uttered by politicians and the chattering class. The 2018 midterm elections are dead ahead. And as we discussed in the last segment, the Democrats keep shooting themselves in the foot. We'll talk about the sad tale of Pocahontas in the next segment, but there's a whole lot more, like in Georgia, where Democrat gubernatorial candidate Stacey Abrams ignited quite the firestorm by saying the blue wave Democrats are hoping to ride to control of the House and Senate will include a, shall we say, diverse array of voters.
It is made up of those who've been told that they are not worthy of being here. Yes. It is comprised of those who are documented and undocumented.
Whoops. Probably not the best idea to encourage illegal aliens to vote, especially when Donald Trump has promised to shut down a caravan of Central Americans headed for our southern border. And many polls reveal that illegal immigration remains a true hot-button issue for Republicans. But the woman who would presumably become Speaker of the House if Republicans take control of the lower chamber of Congress, the woman Republicans love to hate, Nancy Pelosi, said this week that she is unalterably opposed to any kind of border wall and essentially favors open borders.
We have to do something other than building a wall. In my view, it's immoral, expensive, ineffective, and not something that people do between countries. But in any event, it happens to be like a manhood issue for the president. And I'm not interested in that.
Okay. Well, one of the most closely tracked races in the Senate is in Texas, where Ted Cruz is defending his seat against upstart progressive Beto O'Rourke, a new darling on the left. And O'Rourke did something few Democrats have done in a debate with Cruz this week. He used the words of President Trump against his Republican opponent.
Senator Cruz is not going to be honest with you. He's going to make up positions and votes that I've never held or have ever taken. He's dishonest. It's why the president called him Lying Ted, and it's why the nickname stuck, because it's true.
It's clear Congressman O'Rourke's pollsters have told him to come out on the attack. So if he wants to insult me and call me a liar, that's fine. But, you know, John Adams famously said, facts are stubborn things.
You are all talk and no action.
Now, Cruz is still well ahead and may be pulling away in that race. And many have said that Beto O'Rourke pushing a full-bore progressive agenda in Texas is not actually running for the Senate, but staging a demo for a presidential campaign in 2 years, when his name might be added to the dozens of Democrats already fantasizing about a knockout of Donald Trump in 2020. Now, one of the things Republicans are trying to do as we approach Election Day, November 6th, is invoke the name of Hillary Clinton whenever and wherever possible. And the tone-deaf loser of the 2016 presidential election gave them more fodder this week when she was questioned on CBS about her husband's tryst with Monica Lewinsky, which led to his impeachment.
In retrospect, do you think Bill should have resigned in the wake of the Monica Lewinsky scandal?
Absolutely not.
It wasn't an abuse of power?
No.
There are people who look at the incidents of the 90s and they say a president of the United States cannot have a consensual relationship with an intern. The power imbalance is too great.
Who was an adult. But let me ask you this. Where's the investigation of the current incumbent, against whom numerous allegations have been made?
That's it. Change the subject so people might forget that you just justified your husband's sex with an intern in the White House. Democrats, by the way, are practically begging this woman to leave the stage, but she won't. Finally, an interesting perspective on how Donald Trump has evolved from candidate to president. It comes from Leslie Stahl of CBS after she interviewed Trump as a candidate, then as president-elect, and then as president on 60 Minutes last Sunday.
In terms of the three interviews, he was completely different. The one that really stood out was the one 3 days after he won the election.
Well, it's been a wild ride, I'll tell you that.
Where it was my impression that he was in total shock. Right now, he's so much more confident. He is truly president, and you felt it. I felt it in this interview.
Large and in charge. Up next, the sad tale of Pocahontas.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
We believe that all men are entitled to the blessings of liberty.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Heard across the nation on the Radio America Network. And a shout out to those of you listening in the swamp on WWRC 570 AM in Washington, D.C. Some of you making a living in the swamp, others trying to drain it. Well, somewhere, Senator Kamala Harris, Senator Cory Booker, Joe Biden, and a host of other Democrats are quietly snickering. They can now comfort themselves with the fact that one of their chief competitors for the 2020 Democratic presidential nomination has shot herself in the foot with a bow and arrow. Somewhere else, Rachel Dolezal, that white civil rights activist who famously claimed to be black, must be nodding her head and saying to herself, "Been there, done that." Indeed, when the midterm elections are over and the presidential election campaign begins about 1 minute after the stroke of midnight on November 7th, there will be one less serious contender among the dozens of Democrats fantasizing about a knockout of President Trump. In one of the most inexplicable, self-immolating political moves since the deplorable, irredeemable remarks of Hillary Clinton, Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts set out to prove she is indeed an Indian, a Cherokee Indian, by hiring a DNA specialist to drill down on her true heritage. In releasing the results proving that she's actually less Indian than the average American, she's managed to achieve the impossible, making herself into even more of a laughing stock than she already was, and assuring she will be mocked and ridiculed endlessly just as she prepares to launch her all but certain presidential campaign. The most memorable and amusing moment, as we look back in the building story of Pocahontas, came about a year ago when President Trump was meeting with actual Indian leaders in the White House and, in paying tribute to their heritage, just couldn't stop himself from invoking Senator Warren.
You were here long before any of us were here, although we have a representative in Congress who they say was here a long time ago. They call her Pocahontas.
If you could see the faces of those tribal leaders when he said that, it was priceless. Like they're looking at each other like, what are we supposed to do with that? So funny. The president kicked this thing into high gear some time ago when he made an outlandish promise to his supporters if Pocahontas took a DNA test, and then this week ridiculed the results of that test.
We will very gently take that kit and we will slowly toss it. Be very gentle. And we will say, I will give you $1 million to your favorite charity, paid for by Trump, if you take the test and it shows you're an Indian. You know.
Senator Warren released some of her DNA results that show a strong likelihood that she does have Native American roots.
How much? 1,000?
Do you owe her an apology?
No, I don't.
What about the money that
I owe her. She owes the country an apology.
What about the money that you told her you would?
You mean if she gets the nomination in a debate where I was going to have her tested, I'll only do it if I can test her personally. Okay, that will not be something I enjoy doing either.
So once again, another Democrat has fallen into Trump's trap, making a fool of herself in an attempt to make Trump look bad. Pocahontas might have simply ignored or buried the embarrassing findings of that DNA test, but somehow decided to not only trumpet the results as proof of her Indian, quote, heritage, unquote. She's somewhere between 132nd and 1,024th Native American, but she turned it into a political ad. It raises the question of whether she's actually employing Hillary Clinton as a strategic advisor. But never mind that. The Indian thing will surely dominate coverage of Pocahontas from here on out, just as the email scandal did with Hillary. It'll be a steady undercurrent that resonates through her every appearance. Smirks, jokes, and ridicule will follow her everywhere, and she will be thoroughly unelectable. Now, if I were a Democrat who previously favored the Indian goddess, I'd now be looking for a more respectable candidate. Creepy porn lawyer Michael Avenatti, anyone? Now, most confusing about this inexplicable decision by the aging progressive senator is that having already established her bona fides with the resistance, she had been working tirelessly to ingratiate herself with the Democratic establishment to make herself more electable. But she's now essentially thrown all that work out the window by making a fool and spectacle of herself 3 weeks before midterm elections amidst her party's hopes for a much ballyhooed blue wave. Could Pocahontas not see how Trump would instantly make mincemeat of her? President tweeting that Warren is a complete and total fraud and that she should apologize for perpetrating this fraud against the American public. Certainly, she must have been taken aback by the outraged response from a source she probably expected to be supportive, the actual Cherokee Nation, which sent out a press release saying, quote, "It makes a mockery out of DNA tests and its legitimate uses while also dishonoring legitimate tribal governments and their citizens," unquote. Wow, even her relatives are disgusted. No campaign wampum forthcoming from them. Now, this move has only amplified a moniker that stuck to Pocahontas like brown on Indian rice. Heck, the nickname Pocahontas has already become so familiar that Google redlines and auto-corrects the misspelling of it. Perhaps, just as Rachel Dolezal claimed to feel black, Pocahontas is channeling her true inner Indian. Perhaps, like transgender folks, she feels trapped in her European body. Or perhaps she simply realized that the reality of launching her career on a flagrant falsehood, Harvard Law School touting her as the first woman of color professor there, would ultimately represent her Achilles heel on the national stage and required some type of bold action. But there's a difference between bold and reckless. No matter the reason for her jaw-dropping decision to essentially out herself, the list of Democratic presidential hopefuls can effectively be narrowed to dozens minus one, because Pocahontas has just set fire to her own teepee, and no rain dance is going to be able to undo the damage. On CNN, commentator Scott Jennings said, "The meltdown of Pocahontas adds to a long list of Democrats who've disgraced themselves in one way or another."
This is where the Democratic Party is. They've got a plagiarizer, a socialist, Spartacist, creepy porn lawyer, and now bizarro Pocahontas running for president. There's no way any of these people...
You've got a serious sexual assaulter
There's no way they're going to compete with Trump.
Plagiarizer Joe Biden, socialist Bernie Sanders, Spartacus Cory Booker, creepy porn lawyer Michael Avenatti, and bizarro Pocahontas Elizabeth Warren. Good luck with that field. We'll return with Talkin' Liberty.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
And now we have reached the portion of Liberty Nation Radio which we entitled Talkin' Liberty, as we are joined by our regular contributor, constitutional lawyer and LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor, Scott Cosenza. Hello, Scott.
I feel like I dropped a title there, Tim. Can you add one more for me, please?
I'll go back and listen to the tape
Uprising
again.
podcast. How about that?
Okay, co-host.
Thank you.
Well, actually, we're tri-hosts. You, me, Lisa.
Everybody's
tri-hosts.
a co.
Everybody's co. Well, that's true. So you can be one of 20, and you're.
You gave it away. It doesn't. No, you're still diminishing now the role.
You know, you're right. I keep thinking of that because when I went to describe one of the 6 ladies that host The View, I'm like, what do I call her? But I guess the official title is co-host. Well, now that we've dealt with issues of substance, let's move on to the fluff, like the fact that we have the first major world economy to legalize recreational marijuana.
Canada this week, Tim, has legalized non-prescription marijuana, recreational, some people say. And in all the provinces themselves will have specific rules delineating manner and type of sales. But basically the important takeaway is criminal prohibitions are gone. Canadians can have basically a little more than an ounce of weed on them and 4 plants. And this is for adults, of course, not for children. And I think it's very consequential for the drug war globally, and of course locally here with respect to we have a 3,000-mile long undefended border with Canada.
That's my big question: is this undefended border, which I think will start to become somewhat more defended.
Well,
I would think.
I agree with you. In fact, so just for a quick rundown, right now. There's non-prescription marijuana available for sale in Washington State and in Oregon and in Massachusetts and in D.C., and that's as far north as the legal states for non-prescription marijuana go. The whole top of the country that borders Canada is either illegal or just prescription only. So I think you're right. The idea that, like I said, it's a 3,000-mile-long border. If you've ever been through that border in a car, it's a very perfunctory kind of, do you have any this or that? No, go ahead. But, are there enough drug dogs in the world to prevent...
And what kind of will does the American Customs and Border Enforcement really have to... But this, Scott, this might be one thing that the Attorney General, and I've almost forgotten his name because he's become so inconsequential. It's Jeff Sessions. That's right.
Jefferson
He's
Beauregard
the actual,
Sessions.
the actual Attorney General. About the only thing he seems to have spoken out on the entire time he's been Attorney General has been on marijuana. So maybe he'll step in and, maybe he'll finally do something. I don't know.
Is he going to be Attorney General past Easter? I don't think so. We've heard.
I don't think he's going to be past November 7th, the day after the election.
There have been some rumblings that in the spring Trump is prepared to make a move on marijuana. Again, that's just sort of like a rumor thing, so it's almost silly to talk about. But what I think is undeniable, Tim, is the pressure wall that is building for the United States federal government to do something about their blanket prohibition on marijuana. And I want you to think about this for a second. Can your bank now do business with the bank in Canada if you go cash a check or write a check or send a check to somebody in Canada? No, they can't. Not after the money laundering, doing business with criminal drug dealers comes into effect here, right? So these are global financial institutional arrangements that are threatened now by Canada moving into. Now, previously we have Portugal has decriminalized, and Uruguay has
full legalization.
Well, you say full
Almost
legalization.
Full, right?
I'll describe it very briefly. Residents of Uruguay can get permission to buy marijuana. It's not like...
How do you do that? How do you get permission?
You basically fill out a form for the government that says, I'd like to buy marijuana, and they approve your thing, and then you go to a pharmacy. Now, this is as of my...
Now, what happens if they legalize it, recriminalize it? Now they have a list of everybody who's bought.
You're darn tootin'.
Yeah.
And that's why some liberty-minded activists, Tim, would refuse. I mean, many people in California refuse to get that card because they don't want to be on that list.
They'd rather buy on the black market,
That's
probably,
exactly right.
than be listed in some government agency.
Yeah.
Okay. President Donald Trump announcing another wave of judicial nominees, most notably an openly gay conservative, apparently, Patrick Bumatay.
As it turns out, both the senior and junior senators from California are bigots, rampant anti-gay bigots, Tim, because they're opposing Mr. Bumatay's nomination, and he's also like a minority. I think he's like Filipino or something like that. Yeah, it just goes to show you that, of course, ideology is the most important thing on the court for so many people, and the ideology of this man is conservative or conservatarian, right? And that's why he's vehemently opposed by the Democrats.
It's like what they call the National Organization for Women, which is really the National Organization for Liberal Women. Likewise, the walk away and the Me Too movements, those only apply to when conservatives are the aggressors or the apparently or potentially guilty parties.
Convenient weapons to yield against favorite opponents. But I want to say this. There are three, I think, judges going on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and apparently there had been talk of a deal maybe where the liberals would get a pick and then a couple picks and that is now out by the wayside, apparently. The Democrats didn't even attend the most recent Judiciary Committee hearings to move on judges, and Trump is moving ahead, not just with these appeals
at
court
a record
judges,
pace,
a very rapid pace. Yes,
and of course you didn't really listen to the explanations of Dianne Feinstein and Kamala Harris to a gay nominee to the court, because they said they were not consulted prior to their nominations, and thus they are opposing them. So, you've got to read the press releases, Scott, before you...
Let's think about that just for a second. If
Yeah.
you can imagine the hubris involved. In other words, they've said that they haven't even evaluated whether this person is maybe the best person in the universe for the job. Simply because they weren't consulted, they're not going to go ahead. It seems a bit fantastic from people who are in an open, sort of hot talking war anyway against the executive branch, with whom they would ask them to consult.
I think it's clear that at this point, it appears clear that the Republicans will likely hold the Senate, which means we'll have waves and waves of judicial nominees. Already, Donald Trump has done the impossible. He's turned Mitch McConnell into a hero for Republicans because of his stewarding through aggressively, including in a summer session, which is rare for the Senate. He has stewarded through really more judicial appointments than any president in history over the same period.
Republicans. The movement on the judicial front has dipped well into the libertarian as well in terms of the who the candidates are that we might like to see. I'm not for the ideologically pure libertarian, but for the sort of politically active libertarian. And so that's all good news for liberty generally, I think.
So, Scott, let's move on. How about New York prosecutors suing to stop a misconduct watchdog? What is this about?
Well, Tim, nobody likes to be looked after to see if they're doing a good job. The police always reject these accountability types of commissions, and the prosecutors do too. And prosecutors have probably more power than any other official I can think of in terms of the power versus the oversight, right? And to charge somebody with a serious crime up to and including a capital offense. And prosecutors are almost never disciplined for their misconduct, and they do engage in, simply like all human beings, Tim, they engage in misconduct, right? Whether it's through carelessness or active malfeasance or malice.
Or malicious prosecution.
It runs the board.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that's a real big void in terms of our system of checks and balances. And Cuomo signed this bill. This was actually one of those, a good piece of legislation, I think, put into effect. He had a lot of pressure from the left. This is, remember his campaign against Ms. Nixon. She was punishing him. She was punishing him from the left, and I think some very effective blows in terms of why aren't you doing, picking up the low-hanging fruit for helping out these. The criminally charged in our state. And so that's what they did to establish a commission to review complaints of prosecutorial abuse. The prosecutors are having none of it. They do not want oversight. They don't want their their judgments questioned. And they're saying it's no bueno.
But, Scott, doesn't this present constitutional problems, much like the special counsel Robert Mueller, who becomes, in essence, a fourth branch of government that has power over the other three? Is it truly constitutional to appoint someone like this?
Tim, the commission doesn't actually stand as judge, jury, and executioner over prosecutors. It delivers findings, and then the people can act on those findings. And I think that if the state Supreme Court does find that there are constitutional problems, then they just excise those portions of this legislation that do present constitutional difficulty, because the people of New York and of every state in this country need more effective oversight over these prosecutors.
Okay, thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Tim.
This program, Liberty Nation Radio, plus LibertyNation.com's own podcast, The Uprising, hosted by Scott and me and Lisa K. Donner, are available to you on demand at LibertyNation.com, where truth is making a comeback. So that is it for this week, but we'll be back at you next week as we continue our run-up to 2018 midterm elections. So this is Tim Donner saying stand up for liberty, and we'll see you next time on Liberty Nation Radio.